Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Tom Anderson stood in the elegant bathroom of Le Petit Jardin, his fingers working methodically at his burgundy tie. The silk felt smooth against his calloused hands that had built their first home's deck, hands that had carried Emma across countless thresholds, hands that now clenched involuntarily as he checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. 7:15 p.m. 45 minutes late, the restaurant's ornate lighting cast unforgiving shadows across his face, highlighting the web of fine lines that had appeared over 7 years of marriage. He leaned closer to the mirror, studying the subtle changes in his reflection. At 35, he wasn't old, but the weight of his marriage had aged him beyond his years. The constant stress of walking on eggshells, of maintaining the facade of a perfect husband, had left its mark. His phone buzzed against the marble countertop, the sound echoing off the bathroom's tiled walls. Another message from Emma. Traffic. Be there soon. Don't make a scene. Tom's jaw tightened as he read the words. The same excuse, the same commanding tone, the same underlying threat. He could picture her perfectly not stuck in traffic, but somewhere else entirely, taking her time to ensure her entrance would be perfectly timed for maximum impact. The marble felt cool beneath his palms as he braced himself against the counter, forcing slow, measured breaths. In the mirror, he watched his expression smooth out, practiced neutrality, replacing the momentary flash of anger. Emma had taught him this, unknowingly, how to wear a mask, how to hide one's true feelings beneath a careful veneer of calm. The door swung open, and Richard from Emma's office stepped in, his designer suit a sharp contrast to his uncomfortable expression. Tom, the natives are getting restless out there. Any word from Emma? Tom straightened, adjusting his cuffs with deliberate precision. She's on her way. Traffic, apparently. Richard's laugh held a note of disbelief. Right? Traffic. Well, Janet's suggesting we order appetizers. You might want to come manage the situation before she takes charge of your anniversary dinner. Heaven forbid, Tom replied, his voice dry. He followed Richard out of the bathroom, moving through the restaurant's main dining room. The space buzzed with the gentle murmur of conversation and the soft clink of fine china, couples and families enjoying their meals without the weight of pretense that awaited him in the private dining room. That Le Petit Jardin had been Emma's choice, of course. She dismissed his suggestion of celebrating at the intimate Italian restaurant where they'd had their first date. That little place? Darling, we need something more sophisticated for our 7th anniversary. Besides, everyone expects us to do it properly. Everyone. Always everyone. Emma's constant audience. The people she collected like precious gems to reflect her own brilliance. The private dining room door loomed ahead. Solid oak with antique brass fixtures. Tom paused, squaring his shoulders before pushing it open. 20 pairs of eyes turned to him immediately, expressions ranging from sympathy to barely concealed impatience. The room itself was a testament to Emma's taste and her spending habits. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the hand-painted wallpaper, their light catching on the crystal stemware that lined the long mahogany table. Fresh flowers, roses, and lilies. Emma's favorites filled silver vases at precise intervals. The bill for tonight would be astronomical, but Emma had insisted on sparing no expense. We have an image to maintain, darling. Janet, perched at the near end of the table in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary, lifted her empty champagne flute meaningfully. Tom, please tell me Emma's almost here. This celebration is feeling decidedly uncelebratory. She's on her way. Tom repeated the familiar lie, taking his seat at the head of the table. The empty chair beside him seemed to mock him, its vacancy a physical representation of the holes in his marriage. Traffic is heavy tonight? Traffic, Janet echoed, exchanging a knowing look with Maria, another of Emma's inner circle. Well, I suppose we should expect nothing less. Emma does love to make an entrance. The murmur of agreement that rippled around the table made Tom's skin crawl. These people, these supposed friends, had watched his marriage deteriorate for years, had witnessed Emma's subtle cruelty, and had said nothing. Some, he suspected, even admired her for it. Remember last year's Christmas party? Michael, A partner at Emma's firm chuckled from his seat. She was 2 hours late, but showed up looking like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Classic Emma. She had a client emergency. Tom found himself saying, the words bitter on his tongue. Another lie he'd defended, another excuse he'd helped maintain. These things happen in her line of work. Of course they do. Janet smiled, her red lips curving like a wound. Emma's always been so dedicated to her work. You're lucky to have such an ambitious wife, Tom. The word lucky hung in the air like poison. How many times had Emma used that same word? You're lucky I married you, Tom. You're lucky I put up with your boring job. You're lucky I'm patient with your inadequacies. The waiter appeared at Tom's elbow, his presence a welcome interruption. Sir, would you like me to open the champagne? It's been chilling for quite some time. Tom glanced at the bottles of Dom Perignon nestled in their silver ice buckets. Emma had insisted on them, scoffing at his suggestion of the boutique champagne they'd shared at their wedding. That was fine for starting out, darling, but we've moved up in the world. Well, some of us have. Not yet, Tom told the waiter. Let's wait a few more minutes. Janet sighed dramatically. Tom, darling, you're being ridiculous. Emma would want us to start celebrating. It's what she always says the party starts with or without her. Before Tom could respond, his phone buzzed again. The message was shorter this time, 5 minutes. Getting out of the car now. He pocketed the phone, noting how his hands wanted to shake. Not from anxiety, not anymore. Now it was something else, something darker that he kept carefully contained. Let them think he was the patient, passive husband. Let them believe his silence was weakness. The minutes crawled by, filled with increasingly pointed comments about the time and thinly veiled criticisms of his insistence on waiting. Tom sat through it all, his expression pleasant and unchanging. He'd learned from the best, after all. Emma had taught him everything he needed to know about wearing masks, about hiding one's true intentions behind a smile. At precisely 7:30 p.m., the door to the private dining room swung open. Emma had arrived. The room fell silent as Emma appeared in the doorway, and Tom had to admit she knew how to make an entrance. Her crimson dress caught the light like liquid fire, the designer silk clinging to every curve she'd spent countless hours perfecting at the gym. Her blonde hair cascaded over one shoulder in artfully tousled waves, and her makeup was flawless, freshly applied. He noted, not the face of someone who'd been frustrated in traffic. I'm so sorry, everyone. Her voice filled the room like music, hitting that perfect note between apologetic and charming. She moved with practiced grace, her Louboutin heels clicking against the hardwood floor in a steady rhythm. The traffic was absolutely horrible. I hope you haven't been waiting too long. The room erupted in greetings and compliments, their earlier irritation forgotten in the wake of her charisma. Emma worked the room like a conductor leading an orchestra, each interaction perfectly timed and pitched. A light touch on Michael's shoulder as she complimented his new watch. A conspiratorial whisper in Maria's ear that made her laugh. A warm embrace for Janet that lasted just long enough to demonstrate their closeness. Tom remained seated, watching the performance he'd seen countless times before. Emma saved him for last, she always did. It was part of her carefully choreographed routine, a way to emphasize the distance between them even as she played the role of devoted wife. Darling, she purred, finally making her way to his chair. She bent down, brushing her lips against his cheek. The scent of her Chanel perfume wasn't quite strong enough to mask another fragrance, a masculine cologne that made Tom's nostrils flare. I'm so sorry I'm late. You know how these things go. Tom met her eyes, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. Yes, I do know exactly how these things go. Something flickered in Emma's eyes, a momentary crack in her perfect facade. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her practiced smile. She took her seat beside him, immediately turning to Janet. Darling, is that the new Valentino? The cut is absolutely divine on you. The waiter materialized beside them, sensing the shift in the room's energy. Shall we begin with some fresh champagne? Oh, yes. Emma clapped her hands together like an excited child, though Tom could see the slight tremor in her fingers. We must celebrate properly. 7 years of marriage deserves the best champagne, doesn't it, Tom? Of course, Tom replied, watching as she reached for her water glass. Her hand shook almost imperceptibly as she brought it to her lips, leaving a perfect crescent of red lipstick on the rim. Nothing but the best for you, Emma. That's always been the case, hasn't it? She shot him a sharp look over the rim of her glass, her eyes narrowing slightly. Tom, darling, you're being awfully quiet tonight. Usually you're falling over yourself to tell everyone about our first date. The table laughed on cue, and Tom felt the familiar sting of her words. This was Emma's favorite tactic, making him seem desperate and clingy while casting herself as the patient, indulgent wife. The perfect couple narrative, carefully curated to hide the rot beneath. Why don't you tell it, Emma? He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. You always did have a way with stories. Emma's eyes flashed with something like triumph as she launched into the tale. Well, if you insist. Tom had made reservations at this quaint little Italian place, sweet, really, but hardly suitable for a first impression. Thank goodness I suggested that new French bistro instead. You should have seen him trying to pronounce the menu items. More laughter from their audience, and Emma warmed to her performance. But he was so eager to please. Ordered the most expensive wine on the menu, tried to impress me with his knowledge of French cuisine, which, as you can imagine, was rather limited. The wine was your suggestion, as I recall, Tom interjected mildly. Just like you suggested, I cancel my business trip the following weekend to accompany you to the Hamptons. Emma's smile tightened fractionally. Tom has such an interesting way of remembering things, always focusing on the smallest details. The champagne arrived, providing a welcome interruption. Tom watched as the waiter filled each glass, noting how Emma's eyes kept darting to her phone. She placed it face down beside her plate, but it buzzed quietly every few minutes. Expecting an important call? He asked, his voice pitched for her ears alone. Just checking the time, she replied smoothly, though her fingers twitched toward the phone. Unlike some people, I have a busy schedule to maintain. I'm sure Jake keeps you very busy. Emma's hand jerked, sending her fork clattering against her plate. The sharp sound drew several curious glances, but she recovered quickly, letting out a melodious laugh. Oh, you know me. Always clumsy after a few glasses of champagne. The conversation around them resumed, but Tom could feel the tension radiating from his wife. She'd shifted slightly away from him, her posture rigid beneath its elegant facade. Her next words came through barely moving lips, her smile never wavering. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Emma. Just making conversation about your busy schedule. She turned to Janet, her voice deliberately bright. Did I tell you about the new client we landed last week? Massive cosmetics company, very hush-hush at the moment, but it's going to be huge. Tom listened as she spun her tale, noting how she glossed over the late nights and weekend meetings that had accompanied the new account. He wondered if Jake was part of the project team, or if that was just a convenient cover for their rendezvous. The evening progressed with the arrival of appetizers, delicate portions of foie gras, and truffle-infused escargot that Emma had selected. She barely touched her food, Tom noticed, though she made a show of appreciating each dish. Remember when Tom tried to cook me dinner for our first anniversary? She laughed, touching Janet's arm conspiratorially. The poor dear nearly burned down our kitchen. Thank goodness for takeout, right? The table chuckled obligingly, and Tom took another sip of his whiskey. The memory surfaced unbidden, how he'd spent hours preparing her favorite meal, how she called last minute to say she was working late, how the food had gone cold as he waited. The kitchen fire she spoke of had happened months later, when she'd left a pot on the stove while taking a work call in their bedroom. And now here we are, 7 years later, Emma continued, raising her glass in a toast. Tom may not be the best cook, but he makes up for it in other ways. Don't you, darling? The checkbook, you mean? Tom's voice cut through the laughter, sharp and clear. Emma's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. Tom has always been so good with numbers. It's why we work so well together. He handles the boring stuff, and I make sure we have fun. Right, honey? The arrival of their main courses provided a momentary respite from the tension. Tom watched as Emma picked at her salmon, her fork moving food around the plate without really eating. Her eyes kept straying to her phone, which buzzed with increasing frequency as the evening wore on. As the dinner plates were cleared and the staff began preparing for dessert, Emma stood with practiced elegance, smoothing the lines of her dress. I think it's time for our anniversary dance, don't you, Tom? We can't break tradition. The other guests murmured in approval, some already reaching for their phones to capture the moment. Tom rose from his chair, offering his hand as expected. He'd played this role for 7 years, the devoted husband, the patient partner, the willing participant in Emma's carefully crafted narrative. The staff quickly cleared a space in the center of the room as soft music began to play. Tom recognized the song immediately, their wedding dance music, because Emma never missed an opportunity for symbolism. She moved into his arms with practiced ease, but he could feel the stiffness in her shoulders, the slight resistance in her frame. "Everyone's watching," she whispered, her smile fixed in place. "Try to look happy, darling." Tom pulled her closer, one hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The fabric of her dress was cool under his palm, but her skin burned hot beneath it. She was nervous. He could feel it in the tension of her muscles, see it in the slight strain around her eyes. They swayed to the music, maintaining their public image of the perfect couple. Emma's perfume surrounded him, but underneath it was another scent, masculine, familiar from the countless times he'd noticed it on her clothes, her skin. The same cologne that had lingered on her gym towel, her car seats, the shoulders of her blouses. Tom pulled her closer, his lips brushing against her ear. "You reek of Jake. No matter how hard you tried, you couldn't completely wash his scent off you." Emma missed a step, her fingers digging into his shoulder. For a moment, her perfect mask slipped, revealing a flash of genuine fear. She recovered quickly, forcing a laugh that drew curious glances from their audience. "You're being ridiculous, Tom. Is this really the time for your paranoid accusations?" "Just an observation," he replied, maintaining their dance with fluid grace. "Like how you're never home on Tuesday nights? Or how your gym sessions always run long when Jake's car is in the parking lot?" "You're imagining things," she hissed through her smile, though her hand trembled slightly against his shoulder. "This is exactly why I need to spend time away from you. You're suffocating me with your neediness." The song reached its final notes, and Emma pulled away with practiced poise, her public smile firmly in place. "Thank you for the dance, darling. Now, who's ready for dessert?" Their guests applauded, and Emma took a theatrical bow before returning to her seat. Tom remained on the dance floor for a moment longer, watching as she immediately turned to Janet, already spinning their dance into another story that would make him look foolish. He returned to his seat just as the waiters brought out a massive chocolate cake, 7 candles flickering on top. Emma gasped in delight, playing up her surprise though she'd been the one to order it. "Oh, Tom, you shouldn't have." "I didn't," he replied quietly. "You ordered it yourself last week. Remember?" Emma's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Always so literal, aren't you? Can't you just play along for once?" The cake was cut and distributed, and Emma made a show of feeding Tom the first bite. Her eyes were hard despite her playful gesture, and she pressed the fork against his lips with more force than necessary. Tom noticed the red lipstick stain she'd left on the fork, the same shade he'd found on Jake's collar in their gym's parking lot last week. "Perfect, just like our marriage," she announced to their guests, who raised their glasses in another toast. As the evening began to wind down, guests started making their excuses and departing in pairs. Emma worked the room one final time, dispensing hugs and air kisses, making plans for lunch dates and shopping trips she might or might not keep. Tom stood by the door, shaking hands and accepting congratulations that felt like ashes in his mouth. Finally, only Janet remained, gathering her designer purse. "Dinner was lovely," she said, her eyes darting between Tom and Emma. 7 years, that's quite an achievement." "Yes," Tom agreed, helping her with her coat. "Quite an achievement indeed." Emma linked her arm through Janet's. "Let me walk you to your car, darling. I need to powder my nose anyway." Tom watched them leave, noting how Emma's phone was already in her hand, screen tilted away from his view. He settled the bill, adding it to the mental ledger he'd been keeping. Every charge, every withdrawal, every transfer, all carefully documented for when the time came. When Emma returned 20 minutes later, her lipstick was freshly applied, and her phone disappeared quickly into her purse. "Ready to go home, darling?" "I'm absolutely exhausted." "Long day?" Tom asked, holding her coat with exaggerated courtesy. "You have no idea." She slipped her arms into the sleeves, checking her reflection in a nearby mirror. The traffic really was terrible. I'm sure it was, Tom replied, opening the door for her. Almost as terrible as lying to your husband on your anniversary. Emma froze for a moment before continuing through the door. I don't know what's gotten into you tonight, Tom, but I don't appreciate these accusations. You're embarrassing yourself. They walked to their separate cars in silence. Emma had insisted on driving herself, claiming she had early meetings the next day. Another lie to add to the growing pile. Happy anniversary, Emma, Tom called as she reached her car. She turned, her smile cold in the parking lot's harsh lighting. Go home, Tom. Take a sleeping pill. You're clearly not yourself tonight. Tom watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the night. He got into his own car, but didn't start it immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened his banking app, checking the latest transactions. A small smile played at his lips as he reviewed the numbers. Emma thought she had him figured out, the quiet, patient husband who would accept anything to keep the peace. She saw his silence as weakness, his patience as submission. She had no idea that every mock, every lie, every betrayal was another nail in the coffin of their marriage. Let her think she was in control. Let her believe her charm and manipulation still worked. Tom had learned from the best, after all, and soon, very soon, Emma would learn that sometimes the quiet ones were the most dangerous. The engine purred to life, and Tom pulled out of the parking lot, heading in the opposite direction from their home. He had preparations to make, and Emma's arrogance would give him all the time he needed. The morning after their anniversary dinner, Tom sat in his home office, methodically reviewing financial statements. The early sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin lines across his desk as he typed numbers into a spreadsheet. Each entry represented another piece of evidence, another step in his carefully orchestrated plan. The sound of Emma's heels clicking against the hardwood floors echoed through the house. She appeared in his doorway, already dressed for work in a fitted navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. I'm having lunch with Janet today, she announced, adjusting her diamond earrings. Don't wait up tonight. I have a late meeting with a new cosmetics client. Tom didn't look up from his computer. With Jake? Emma's fingers stilled on her earring. What is wrong with you lately? Jake is a colleague, nothing more. Your paranoia is becoming tedious. Interesting choice of words, Tom replied, finally meeting her gaze. Considering Jake's wife called me yesterday. The color drained from Emma's face, but she recovered quickly. And what exactly did that unstable woman have to say? Nothing concrete. Just concerns about late-night texts and suspicious charges on their credit card. Tom leaned back in his chair. At that new French hotel downtown, the one you recommended for our clients last month? Emma's laugh was sharp, defensive. That woman has always been jealous of successful people. She probably saw a business dinner charge and let her imagination run wild. She strode into the office, planting her hands on his desk. I won't have you questioning my professional relationships based on the ravings of a bitter housewife. Professional relationships, Tom echoed, his voice flat. Like the one you had with David from accounting last year? Or Michael from legal the year before that? You're being ridiculous. Emma straightened, smoothing her skirt. I have meetings to attend. Real work to do, unlike some people who sit around making up conspiracies. By all means, Tom gestured to the door. Don't let me keep you from your meetings. Emma turned on her heel, but paused at the doorway. I put up with a lot from you, Tom. Your boring job, your lack of ambition, your constant need for validation. Don't push me on this. Wouldn't dream of it, Tom replied, turning back to his computer. Have fun at lunch with Janet. Give Jake my regards when you see him later. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Tom waited until he heard her car pull out of the driveway before reaching for his phone. He dialed a number he'd memorized weeks ago. Mr. Harrison? Tom Anderson. Yes, I'd like to proceed with those property transfers we discussed. He paused, listening. No, Emma won't be joining us. As her pattern of financial irresponsibility demonstrates, it's best if I handle these matters personally. After ending the call, Tom opened his desk drawer and removed a thick manila envelope. Inside were copies of text messages, credit card statements, and hotel receipts, all meticulously organized and dated. Emma thought she was being careful, but she'd grown sloppy in her arrogance. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Saw Emma having coffee with Jake at Riverside Cafe. Thought you should know. Tom smiled slightly as he typed his response. Thanks for keeping me informed. Everything's proceeding as planned. Richard had been surprisingly eager to help once Tom had shown him evidence of Emma's affair with his wife last spring. Amazing how quickly loyalty shifted when personal interests were at stake. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and emails. Tom coordinated with his lawyer, arranged meetings with financial advisors, and began the process of transferring their assets. Emma had always dismissed his boring job in financial planning, never realizing how valuable those skills would prove. 18 noon. His phone rang again. The caller ID showed Janet's name. Tom. Janet's voice was pitched higher than usual. I just had the most interesting lunch with Emma. She seems concerned about your behavior lately. Does she now? Tom kept his voice neutral. And what behavior would that be? She says you've been making accusations, acting paranoid. She's worried about your mental state. Janet paused for effect. She mentioned you've been tracking her movements, checking her phone. Tom allowed himself a small laugh. And you're calling to what? Janet? Check on my mental health? Or report back to Emma? I'm calling as a friend, Janet protested. We've known each other for years. I care about both of you. Like you cared when you covered for her affair with David? Or was it Michael you helped her hide? Tom's voice remained calm, but Janet's sharp intake of breath told him the barbs had landed. Your loyalty to Emma is admirable, Janet. But you might want to ask yourself why she really needs you to make this call. I don't know what you're talking about. Emma would never save it. Tom cut her off. Tell Emma whatever you want about this conversation. It doesn't matter anymore. He ended the call and checked his watch. Emma would be fuming by now, realizing her attempt to gaslight him through Janet had failed. Her next move would be to try to reassert control, probably by demanding they meet for dinner to discuss their issues. Right on cue, his phone buzzed with a text from Emma. We need to talk. Dinner tonight. La Maison. 7 p.m. Tom typed his response carefully. Can't tonight. Taking a long drive. Need to clear my head. Emma's reply was immediate. This isn't a request, Tom. We're having dinner? No, he wrote back. We're not. He turned off his phone and picked up his briefcase. It was time to meet with his lawyer again. Emma's determination to maintain control would make her predictable, and predictability was exactly what he needed right now. The law office of Harrison and Associates occupied the entire top floor of a downtown high-rise. Tom sat across from Peter Harrison, watching as the lawyer reviewed the latest documentation. Everything appears to be in order, Peter said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The house sale will close next week. Have you arranged for alternate accommodations? Already taken care of? Tom handed over another folder. I've leased an apartment in Mount Ridge under my company's name. Emma won't be able to trace it. Peter's eyebrows rose as he scanned the new documents. She's going to be furious when she realizes what you've done with the assets. She's going to be furious regardless. Tom's voice was steady. Better to control the explosion than let her light the fuse. The intercom buzzed, and Peter's secretary's voice filled the room. Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Anderson is here. She's quite insistent about seeing her husband. Tom checked his watch right on schedule. Emma's predictability was becoming almost comical. Send her in, Tom said before Peter could respond. It's time she understood how things are going to work. The office door flew open, and Emma stormed in, her heels stabbing the carpet with each step. Her face was flushed with anger beneath her perfect makeup. What the hell do you think you're doing? She demanded, ignoring Peter completely. I've been calling you all day. Tom remained seated, his posture relaxed. Having a meeting with my lawyer. As you can see, your lawyer? Emma's laugh was brittle. Since when do you make legal decisions without consulting me? Probably around the same time you started making personal decisions without consulting me. Tom nodded to Peter. Would you give us a moment? The lawyer gathered his papers and quietly left the room. Emma waited until the door closed before rounding on Tom. If you think you can intimidate me with these childish games, sit down, Emma. Tom's voice cut through her tirade. Unless you prefer to have this conversation standing. Something in his tone made her pause. She sank into the chair Peter had vacated, though her spine remained rigid with anger. "What is this about?" she demanded. "And don't give me more paranoid accusations about Jake." "This isn't about Jake," Tom replied, "though I'm sure he'll be interested to know you've been seeing Michael on the side as well." Emma's face whitened. "What are you talking about?" "The text messages weren't as deleted as you thought." Tom pulled out his phone, scrolling through screenshots. "You really should be more careful with your passwords. Or at least use different ones for your various accounts." "You went through my phone?" Emma's voice rose. "How dare you invade my privacy?" "Privacy." Tom laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Like the privacy you invaded when you emptied our savings account last year? Or when you took out a credit card in my name? That was for emergencies. Emergency shopping sprees at Gucci? Emergency weekends at luxury hotels?" Tom leaned forward. "Emergency gifts for your various boyfriends?" Emma's composure cracked. "You're twisting everything. I work hard for this family. You deserve exactly what's coming to you." Tom slid a document across the desk. "Our house has been sold." "What?" Emma snatched up the paper, her hands shaking. "You can't sell our house without my consent." "Actually, I can. You signed over your rights last month, remember? When you were too busy texting Jake during our meeting with the financial advisor to read what you were signing." Emma's face cycled through shock, rage, and fear. "I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer." "With what money?" Tom's voice remained calm. "Your credit cards have been canceled. The joint accounts are empty. And those expensive gifts you bought with company funds? The audit trail leads directly to you." "You wouldn't dare expose me like that," Emma hissed. "You'll ruin both of us." "No, Emma. Just you." Tom stood straightening his jacket. "Your personal accounts should keep you comfortable for a while. Assuming you've been honest about your savings." Emma surged to her feet, her designer purse falling forgotten to the floor. "You can't do this to me. I made you. You were nothing before me, a boring accountant with no ambition. I gave you class, connections, a life worth living, and I'm giving you exactly what you deserve." Tom moved to the door. "Consider it my final gift to you." "The courts won't let you get away with this," Emma snarled. "I'll tell them everything, how you stalked me, threatened me, manipulated me." "You mean like these recordings?" Tom held up his phone. "Every conversation, every threat, every admission of your affairs, all documented. Would you like to hear some highlights?" Emma's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. For the first time in their marriage, she seemed completely at a loss for words. "Your things will be moved to storage by the end of the week," Tom continued. "The access code will be sent to your office. Don't try to enter the house. I've already changed the security system. Where am I supposed to go?" Emma's voice cracked, her armor finally showing real cracks. "That's not my concern anymore." Tom opened the door. "Though I hear Jake has a lovely guest room. When his wife's not home, of course." He left her standing in the lawyer's office, her perfect world crumbling around her. In the elevator, Tom finally allowed himself a small smile. Emma had taught him well about manipulation, about patience, about wearing masks. Now she would learn just how good a student he'd been. His phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Emma just called. "She's hysterical." "What should I do?" "Nothing," Tom typed back. "That's exactly what she did for you when she ruined your marriage last year. Remember?" The elevator reached the ground floor, and Tom stepped out into the afternoon sunlight. He had more meetings to attend, more pieces to move into place. Emma would try to fight back. Her pride wouldn't allow anything else. But for the first time in their marriage, he was the one in control, and he was just getting started. The next morning, Tom arrived early at his office to find Emma waiting in the lobby. She wore yesterday's suit, her usual polished appearance showing signs of strain. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, despite her attempts to conceal them with makeup. "Your secretary wouldn't let me up," she said, falling in a step beside him as he walked to the elevator. "Since when do I need an appointment to see my husband?" "Since you became a hostile party in pending legal proceedings." Tom pressed the elevator button, keeping his eyes forward. "Any communication should go through our lawyers." "Our lawyers?" Emma's laugh held an edge of desperation. "Listen to yourself. We don't need lawyers. We need to talk about this like rational adults." The elevator arrived, empty. Tom stepped inside, and Emma followed before he could stop her. "You want to talk now?" He pressed the button for his floor. After 7 years of talking down to me? Of treating me like your personal ATM? That's not fair. Emma's voice rose. I helped build your image, your social connections. You were nothing before me, and you'll be nothing after me. Tom's calm words hit harder than any shout. That's what really terrifies you, isn't it? Not losing me, losing your lifestyle. The elevator stopped at his floor. Tom stepped out, but Emma grabbed his arm. I made a mistake, okay? Her voice cracked. Is that what you want to hear? I made mistakes, but we can work through this. Tom looked down at her hand, then back at her face. Like you worked through things with David? Or Michael? Or Jake? They meant nothing. Emma's fingers dug into his sleeve. It was stupid. I was bored. You were always so focused on work, on being responsible. Remove your hand, Tom said quietly, or I'll call security. Emma snatched her hand back as if burned. You wouldn't dare make a scene? Try me? Tom straightened his jacket. The time for scenes is over, Emma. Now it's just business. He walked away, leaving her in the elevator. His secretary, Maria, looked up as he approached her desk. Mrs. Anderson isn't to be allowed up without an appointment, he reminded her. And if she makes one, notify security. Already done, sir. Maria handed him a stack of messages. Also, Mr. Stevens called. He says Emma tried to access your joint investment account this morning. As expected, Tom took the messages. Any other attempts? She called the real estate agent about the house sale. In the country club, apparently, she tried to charge a rather expensive lunch to your membership yesterday. Tom smiled slightly. How did that work out for her? Not well, from what I heard. Maria lowered her voice. She made quite a scene when her cards were declined. Inside his office, Tom found 3 voicemails from Janet and 1 from Michael. He deleted them without listening. They'd be the same as always. Emma's flying monkeys trying to make him feel guilty. To draw him back into her web of manipulation, his phone buzzed with a text from Jake. We need to talk. Emma's saying some concerning things. Worried about your wife finding out. Tom typed back. Or your boss? There was a long pause before Jake's response came through. What do you want? Nothing from you, Tom replied. Just stay out of my way. He set his phone aside and opened his laptop. The notification he'd been waiting for appeared in his inbox, confirmation that the house sale had closed early. Emma would be getting the news any minute now, right on cue. His phone exploded with notifications. Calls from Emma, from Janet, from their real estate agent. Text messages flooding in. Tom ignored them all, focusing instead on the next phase of his plan. The intercom buzzed. Sir? Maria's voice was tense. Mrs. Anderson is in the lobby again. She's causing a disturbance. Tom pulled up the security feed on his computer. Emma was at the front desk, her composure completely shattered. Her hair was disheveled, her mascara smeared from tears or rage. Don't let her up, he instructed. If she doesn't leave in 5 minutes, call the police. Already on standby, sir. Tom watched the scene unfold on his monitor. Security approached Emma, who began gesturing wildly, her voice loud enough that the camera picked up fragments of her accusations. Other people in the lobby were staring, phones recording the meltdown of the usually perfectly poised Mrs. Anderson, finally faced with the choice between leaving voluntarily or being escorted out by the police. Emma stormed out of the building. Tom switched off the monitor and returned to his work. An hour later, his phone buzzed with a new email. Emma had posted a long, rambling message on social media, accusing him of emotional abuse and financial manipulation. He forwarded it to his lawyer without reading the whole thing. It would just be more ammunition for their eventual court proceedings. His desk phone rang a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Anderson? The voice was professional, clipped. This is Margaret Willis from First National Bank. We've had a situation with Mrs. Anderson attempting to access your private accounts. She's claiming to be an authorized user. She's not, Tom replied smoothly. I trust you followed proper security protocols? Of course, sir. But she became quite insistent. We had to contact security. I understand. Please add a note to all my accounts. Mrs. Anderson is not to be given any information or access, regardless of what documentation she claims to have. Already done, sir. And sir? She mentioned something about a new car she ordered in your name. Tom's smile was cold. Cancel it. And flag any other attempts at unauthorized purchases. The rest of the day passed in a blur of similar calls and messages. Emma tried every financial avenue available, only to find each one closed to her. Her desperation grew with each failure, her attempts becoming more erratic. Late that afternoon, Tom's secretary buzzed him again. "Sir? A delivery just arrived from La Maison Jewelry. They say Mrs. Anderson ordered it last week. On your account." "Perfect timing," Tom murmured. "Send it in." The delivery man brought in a sleek black box. Inside would be the diamond necklace Emma had been dropping hints about for months. The one she'd probably planned to wear to her next rendezvous with Jake. "Return it," Tom told the delivery man. "And please inform the store that any future purchases by Mrs. Anderson should be declined." His phone buzzed again. Emma, calling for the 20th time that day. This time he answered. "You bastard," she screamed before he could speak. "You're trying to destroy me." "No, Emma," he replied calmly. "You did that all by yourself." He ended the call and turned back to his computer. There was still work to be done, preparations to make. Emma's desperation would make her dangerous, but it would also make her sloppy, and Tom was counting on exactly that. 3 weeks after their confrontation at his office, Tom stood in his new apartment, adjusting his tie in the mirror. The space was smaller than their former home, but functionally furnished no trace of Emma's expensive tastes or overwrought decorating schemes. The silence felt like freedom. His phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "She's been calling everyone, trying to get details about tonight's dinner." "Let her," Tom typed back. "Everything's ready." The second anniversary dinner had been his idea, a smaller gathering at Le Petit Jardin, where everything had started to unravel 3 weeks ago. Emma had jumped at the invitation, clearly seeing it as an opportunity to regain control of the narrative. His phone rang. Janet's number flashed on the screen. "Tom." Janet's voice was hesitant when he answered. "Are you sure about tonight?" "Emma's. She's not stable right now." "Worried about your friend?" Tom kept his voice neutral. "Or worried about what she might reveal about your role in her affairs?" "That's not fair." Janet's protest sounded weak even to her. "I never meant to help her deceive me? To cover for her meetings with Jake? Or was it Michael you were running interference for? I thought I was helping a friend." Janet's voice cracked. "She said you were controlling, that she needed space. And now?" Tom interrupted. "What's she saying now?" A pause. "She's saying she can fix everything. That she just needs to talk to you, to make you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." Tom checked his watch. "Will you be at dinner tonight?" "Yes," Janet whispered. She insisted. "Good. You should be there to see how your help played out." He ended the call before she could respond. The doorbell rang right on schedule. Tom opened it to find Michael standing there, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "She went to my wife," Michael blurted without preamble. "Told her everything about us, about how you drove her to it with your emotional distance. Lucy's threatening divorce. How unfortunate." Tom stepped aside, gesturing for Michael to enter. "Though I suppose turnabout is fair play. You didn't seem concerned about my marriage when you were meeting Emma at the Westbrook Hotel." Michael's face reddened. "That was different," she said. "She said I was boring, controlling, emotionally unavailable." Tom's laugh was cold. "She has a limited playlist, doesn't she? Tell me, did she use the same lines on Jake that she used on you?" "I never meant—" Michael stopped, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want from me, Tom?" "Your presence at dinner tonight." Tom moved to his desk, picking up a manila envelope. "And your signature on these documents." Michael took the envelope with shaking hands. "What is this?" "A sworn statement detailing your affair with Emma, including dates, locations, and her misuse of company funds to facilitate your meetings." Tom's voice was businesslike. "Sign it, come to dinner, and I'll keep the hotel receipt she charged to your corporate card from reaching the board of directors." "You're blackmailing me?" "No, Michael. I'm offering you a choice." Tom checked his watch again. "You have 3 minutes to decide." Michael stared at the envelope for a long moment before grabbing a pen from Tom's desk. His signature was shaky, but legible on every page. "Lucy doesn't need to know about the corporate card," he said quietly. "That depends entirely on your performance tonight." Tom took the signed documents and locked them in his desk. 7 o'clock. "Don't be late." After Michael left, Tom made one final call. Everything's set at the restaurant, the manager confirmed. Private room, just as you requested. And the special arrangements? All taken care of? Tom smiled slightly. Just make sure the cameras are running. We wouldn't want to miss a moment of this special evening. He ended the call and stood at his window, watching the city lights come on as dusk settled. Emma would be preparing for tonight, certain she could charm her way back into control. She'd wear something stunning, arrive fashionably late, and play the role of the wronged wife seeking reconciliation. Let her come with her manipulations and lies. Tom was ready. More than ready, he was eager to show her exactly how well she'd taught him about control, about patience, about revenge. Served with a perfect smile, his phone buzzed one final time, a text from Emma herself. Looking forward to tonight, darling. We have so much to discuss. Tom didn't bother responding. They did have much to discuss, but not in any way Emma was expecting. Tonight would be their final dance, and this time he would be leading. Le Petit Jardin's private dining room hummed with nervous energy. Tom stood near the window, watching as guests arrived in pairs, their forced smiles and awkward greetings betraying the tension in the air. Janet sat rigid in her chair, picking at her manicure. Michael kept checking his phone, his face pale under the crystal chandeliers. Richard hung back near the bar, avoiding eye contact with everyone. She's here, the maitre d' announced from the doorway. Tom turned as Emma made her entrance. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her blonde hair swept up elegantly. But Tom noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the tightness around her eyes that her perfect makeup couldn't quite conceal. Darling, she purred, moving toward him with practiced grace. You look wonderful. Save the performance, Emma. Tom's voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. You're not here to reconcile. Her smile flickered. Can a wife want to fix her marriage? A wife? Yes. Tom gestured to her chair. A manipulative adulteress trying to salvage her lifestyle? That's a different story. Emma's eyes narrowed, but she took her seat, immediately turning to Janet. Darling, you look exhausted. Has something been keeping you up at night? Janet flinched. I'm fine. Just work stress. Of course, Emma's voice dripped with false sympathy. It must be so difficult, juggling all those responsibilities. Tom caught the thread in her words. Emma was reminding Janet who knew her secrets, who could destroy her carefully maintained image with a few well-placed revelations. Speaking of responsibilities, Tom interrupted. Michael, how's Lucy? Michael nearly knocked over his water glass. We're working through some things. Aren't we all? Emma's laugh held a brittle edge. Marriage is such complex work, isn't it? So many challenges to overcome. Like fidelity? Tom asked mildly. Or basic honesty? The waiter appeared with champagne, providing a momentary reprieve from the mounting tension. Emma reached for her glass with a slightly unsteady hand. A toast, she declared, raising her glass. To new beginnings. To truth, Tom countered, meeting her eyes. In all its uncomfortable glory. Emma's smile tightened. Tom, darling, perhaps we should focus on moving forward, not dwelling on misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Richard spoke up for the first time. Is that what we're calling it now? Richard, Emma's voice carried a warning. This isn't the time. When is the time? Richard's laugh was harsh. When you're done destroying everyone's lives. When you finish playing your little games? I don't know what Tom's been telling you, Emma began, her tone reasonable. But he's not been himself lately. The stress of work, perhaps, or finding out his wife has been sleeping with half the company. Richard shot back. The room fell silent. Emma's face flushed red, then pale. How dare you? She hissed. Tom, are you going to let him speak to me this way? Why not? Tom's voice remained calm. He's only stating facts. Would you prefer we discuss the hotel receipts? The credit card statements? The interesting text you thought you deleted? This is ridiculous. Emma stood abruptly. I won't sit here and be attacked. Sit down, Emma. Tom's command cut through her protest. We're just getting started. She sank back into her chair, her composure cracking. I don't know what you think you're doing, but what I'm doing, Tom interrupted, is giving you exactly what you deserve. A public performance. Isn't that what you've always wanted? All eyes on Emma. He nodded to the waiter, who wheeled in a small television screen. Emma's eyes widened as security footage began to play she and Jake in the hotel elevator, she and Michael in the restaurant. Countless scenes of her deceptions captured in crisp, undeniable detail. "Turn it off," she demanded, her voice shaking. "This is harassment." "No, Emma. This is consequences." Tom gestured to the screen. "Every meeting, every lie, every manipulation, all documented. Would you like to explain to everyone how you use company funds to finance your affairs? Or should we ask Jake about that?" "Jake has nothing to do with." Emma stopped as the door opened again. Jake's wife Amanda walked in, her expression cold. "Actually, he has everything to do with it. Don't you, Emma?" Emma's face went ashen. "Amanda, I can explain. Like you explained using my husband's corporate card for your little getaways?" Amanda's smile was razor sharp. "Or like you explained the late-night meetings that never appeared on any official calendar?" "This is a setup," Emma accused, turning to Tom. "You orchestrated all of this to humiliate me." "No, Emma. You did this all by yourself." Tom's voice carried throughout the silent room. "I just made sure everyone could see the real you. The manipulator. The liar. The fraud." Emma's composure finally shattered completely. "You think you can destroy me?" she shrieked, rising from her chair. "I made you. You were nothing before me. Nothing. And now," Tom replied calmly, "you're nothing without me." Emma stood trembling in the center of the room, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The other guests watched in stunned silence as she struggled to regain her composure. "You want to talk about fraud?" Tom's voice remained steady as he rose from his chair. "Let's discuss the company credit cards you maxed out, or the client funds you've been misappropriating. You have no proof." Emma began, but Tom cut her off with a laugh. "No proof? I have 7 years of proof." He pulled out a folder and began laying documents on the table. Bank statements, credit card bills, hotel receipts, even those clever little transfers you thought you'd hidden so well. Janet leaned forward, her face paling as she recognized some of the documents. "Emma, you said those charges were approved. They were business expenses." Emma's voice rose hysterically. "Everything was for work, for maintaining our image. Like the diamond bracelet you bought Jake?" Amanda interjected. "Was that a business expense too?" Emma spun to face her. "You don't understand. Your husband was unhappy. Spare me the justifications." Amanda's voice was ice. "The board of directors received copies of everything this morning. Jake's already been asked to resign." "You're bluffing," Emma whispered, but her hands were shaking violently now. Tom shook his head. "The police have probably arrived at your office by now. Fraud investigation tends to move quickly when the evidence is this clear." "My office?" Emma's composure cracked completely. "What have you done?" "Nothing you didn't do to yourself." Tom gestured to Michael. "Would you like to explain about the falsified expense reports, or should I?" Michael stared at his hands. "I'm sorry, Emma. I had to come clean. They were going to press charges. You betrayed me." Emma's laugh was borderline hysterical. After everything you what, Emma?" Tom's voice cut through her hysteria. "After you seduced him? Manipulated him? Used him like you used everyone else?" "I didn't." Emma tried to grab her purse, but Janet moved it out of reach. "Your cards have all been canceled," Tom informed her. "Your account's frozen. The house is sold. Your car has been repossessed. Even your office has been cleared out." Emma stumbled slightly, gripping the back of a chair for support. "You can't do this to me." "Actually, I can't." "And I did." Tom moved to stand before her. "You taught me well, Emma. About patience. About planning. About waiting for the perfect moment to strike." "I'll fight this," she threatened, but her voice wavered. "I'll get lawyers." "With what money?" Richard spoke up. "Your personal accounts are empty. Your credit is ruined. Your reputation." He gestured to the other guests, who were all carefully avoiding Emma's gaze. "Someone will help me," Emma insisted, looking around desperately. "Janet." "I can't," Janet whispered. "They're investigating everyone who helped cover up your fraud. I could lose everything." "Michael?" Emma's voice cracked. "After everything we shared, my wife knows everything, Emma." Michael wouldn't meet her eyes. "I signed a full confession." Emma's legs gave out, and she sank into a chair. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it is. Tom's voice was almost gentle. You're finished, Emma. No more manipulations. No more lies. No more using people like toys for your amusement. I loved you, she tried, tears streaming down her face. Everything I did was for us. No. Tom's voice hardened. Everything you did was for yourself. Your greed. Your ego. Your endless need for control. He turned to address the room. I appreciate everyone coming tonight. I know it wasn't easy, but Emma always did insist on having an audience for her performances. It seemed fitting to give her one last show. You bastard. Emma spat, mascara running down her cheeks. You planned this whole thing? Like you planned every manipulation? Every affair? Every lie? Tom smiled coldly. I learned from the best, remember? The door opened, and two men in suits entered. Mrs. Anderson? We're with the fraud division. We need you to come with us. Emma looked wildly around the room, finding no allies among the faces she'd once commanded so easily. Tom, please. Goodbye, Emma. Tom straightened his tie. Consider this my parting gift, the truth you never thought I was strong enough to tell. They all watched as Emma was led away, her designer dress and perfect makeup unable to mask her complete destruction. The room remained silent for a long moment after she left. Janet broke the silence first. Tom, I'm so sorry. If I'd known, save it. Tom's voice was firm. You all saw what she was doing. You helped her do it. Remember that the next time someone asks you to cover up their lies. He gathered his documents, tucking them back into their folder. The police will probably want to speak with each of you. I suggest being honest. Emma's not the only one who kept records. One by one, the guests filed out, leaving Tom alone in the private dining room. He stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through the glass. 7 years of marriage, of manipulation, of careful planning all ended in a single evening. His phone buzzed with a message from his lawyer. Police have her in custody. The fraud charges are just the beginning. Tom smiled slightly as he turned off his phone. Emma had always underestimated him, seeing his quiet nature as weakness, his patience as submission. She'd never understood that sometimes the quiet ones were the most dangerous. He left the restaurant, nodding to the manager who had helped set up the evening's surveillance. The night air felt clean, fresh with possibility. Tomorrow, he would start his new life in the quiet town he'd already selected, taking the job he'd lined up weeks ago. No more pretense, no more society parties, no more walking on eggshells. Emma would face the consequences of her actions, her perfect image shattered beyond repair. She'd lost everything: her status, her freedom, her carefully cultivated connections. All because she never realized that the husband she'd dismissed as boring and weak had been watching, learning, and planning. Tom got into his car, adjusting the mirror. His reflection showed no regret, no hesitation. Emma had taught him well about revenge, about patience, about wearing masks. Now she would have the rest of her life to reflect on just how good a student he'd been.